Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a really challenging and incredibly important text. It's one that fundamentally shifted the conversation in America around race and our justice system. We're talking about the new Jim Crow.
It's a critical piece of work for sure. And our goal today really is to get past just the title. We want to unpack the core argument of the book, which is that mass incarceration in the U.S. isn't primarily about fighting crime.
Right.
It's about, well, the book argues it's a comprehensive system of social control, a modern-day racial caste system.
And it's dense stuff. We're going to be walking through legal history, sociology.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to give you a clear path through it all, to understand the machinery of it, the legal framework, and the just the devastating impact of this system that, as the book says, operates mostly just out of sight.
And the best way to start, I think, is the way the book starts, with one single family story that it captures the entire argument perfectly.
This is the story of Jarvis Cotton.
Exactly. His family history is this staggering illustration of how racial control in America just keeps adapting. It changes its form over the centuries, but the outcome stays pretty much the same.
Which is?
The denial of basic citizenship. So Jarvis Cotton himself, today he can't vote. And the reason is he's a felon on parole.
Okay, so a modern reason. A colorblind reason.
A colorblind reason, exactly. But then you trace it back. You go back 5 generations. His great-great-grandfather was a slave. He couldn't vote because it was illegal.
Of course.
His great-grandfather, after emancipation, he tried to register. He was met with Klan intimidation, violence.
So still no vote.
Still no vote. His grandfather was deterred by, just the constant threats, the fear. Then his own father comes along during the Jim Crow era, and he faces the poll taxes, the literacy tests, all these supposedly neutral barriers.
But designed specifically to keep him from voting.
100%. And now you have Jarvis Cotton, and he's branded a felon. The legal tool changes, right? From slavery to intimidation to economic barriers, and now to this criminal label.
But the result for the black man in every single one of those generations is exactly the same. No participation in American democracy.
It's a shocking realization, and it's really the anchor for the entire book. The method adapts, to fit an era that claims to be all about legal equality, but the outcome, this permanent exclusion, it stays the same.
Okay, so that story really sets the stage for the book's central thesis. Let's define it clearly. When we use this term, racial caste system, what exactly does that mean in this context?
It means a system where a specific stigmatized racial group is locked into a subordinate position. And it's not just by custom, it's by law and by policy.
And the book's argument is that mass incarceration is the main vehicle for this today.
It's the most damaging one, far more damaging, the author argues, than the fights over affirmative action, which, tend to get all the media attention.
But that feels so contradictory. I mean, the common narrative in the U.S. is that we're living in a post-racial society, or at least we're trying to be colorblind.
Well, that contradiction is the whole point. The book calls this the illusion of colorblindness.
The illusion.
Yeah, because the laws themselves, the mandatory minimums, the drug laws, the sentencing rules, they never mention the word race. So the public consensus, the way we all talk about it, is that race doesn't matter anymore.
So colorblindness isn't the solution here. The argument is it's actually part of the problem. It's what allows the system to hide.
It's the camouflage. It works like an optical illusion. Old Jim Crow was obvious. It was a whites-only sign over a water fountain. You couldn't miss it.
Right.
But the new Jim Crow is hidden. It's hidden in the discretion a police officer has on the street. It's hidden in the threat a prosecutor uses to get a plea bargain. It's in the fine print on a rental application. The very idea that race doesn't matter is what stops us from seeing the racialized structure of the whole thing.
To see it, then, we have to look at the historical pattern. The book says these systems of control aren't just a one-time thing.
Not at all. They follow a cycle. A system like slavery is dismantled, right? And then there's this period of confusion, of transition. And then almost immediately it gets reborn in a new form, one that's perfectly tailored to the new legal and economic rules of that era.
And there's a specific political tool that makes this rebirth possible, something the book calls the racial bribe.
Yes, the racial bribe. This is a really crucial concept. It's the strategy that white elites have used all through American history to break up any chance of class solidarity.
You mean poor whites and non-whites getting together?
Exactly. Whenever that starts to happen, whenever they find common economic ground, the ruling class steps in and extends some kind of privilege, the bribe, to poor whites. It gives them a personal stake, a psychological investment in keeping the racial hierarchy in place.
And we can see this happen way back at the very beginning of race-based slavery.
Absolutely. Go back to the late 1600s. You have Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, where you saw black slaves, white indentured servants, and poor whites all banding together to fight the wealthy planter class. And that terrified the elites.
So they had to find a way to split them up.
And their solution was to invent race, legally speaking. They started passing laws that gave special privileges only to poor whites. Things like access to land, certain legal rights, the job of policing slaves on patrols. It drove this permanent wedge between them and black laborers.
Even if the poor white person wasn't getting rich, they're getting the psychological wage of whiteness, as W.E.B. Du Bois would later call it.
That's the bribe, and you see it happen again right after the Civil War with the rise of Jim Crow. During Reconstruction, you had the populist movement, which for a short time threatened to unite poor white farmers and black sharecroppers against the big railroads and banks.
Another moment of potential class solidarity.
And again, the elites moved to crush it. This time, the bribe was segregation. There's this incredible quote from a populist leader, Tom Watson.
Right, he initially tried to build that interracial coalition.
He did, and then he completely flipped. And he explained the cynical logic perfectly. He told poor whites, basically, you are kept apart so that you can be separately fleeced of your earnings. You're made to hate each other because on that hatred rests the whole system that enslaves you both.
Wow. So segregation was the new bribe. It gave poor whites a badge of superiority to distract them from their own economic exploitation.
That's the pattern. And that brings us to the modern system. We have to define mass incarceration very carefully here. It's not just prisons.
Oh.
It's the whole web. It's the laws, the rules, the policies, the customs, everything that controls people who get labeled criminal, whether they're inside a prison cell or out on the street. It's a system that locks a huge chunk of the African-American community out of mainstream society permanently.
But there's a key difference between this system and the ones that came before it.
A profound difference. And it has everything to do with our economy, slavery and Jim Crow. They were systems designed to control and exploit black labor.
They needed black people to work.
They were economically essential. Mass incarceration, on the other hand, is designed to warehouse a population that is now seen as disposable, as unnecessary to the functioning of our new global post-industrial economy.
That is a chilling distinction.
Yeah.
To go from being exploited for your labor to being seen as surplus to requirements.
It explains the sheer scale of it, the punitiveness. If there's no economic need for this population, where's the incentive to stop warehousing them? It creates a much, much harder problem to solve.
Okay, so if mass incarceration is the system, the book identifies the war on drugs as the engine, the thing that made it grow so huge so fast.
And the first thing we have to do here is just debunk the official story, the myth that everyone believes about the war on drugs.
Which is that it was a necessary response to the crack cocaine crisis of the 80s.
Right. But the book shows that's just false. The war on drugs was officially declared by President Reagan in 1982. At that time, drug crime was actually on the decline.
So the war was declared before the crisis it was supposedly fighting.
Precisely. That one fact just completely undermines the whole narrative that our giant prison population is just a rational response to crime rates. It's not. Sociologists have shown for years that how much a society punishes people often has very little to do with how much crime there is.
It's a tool of social control.
It's a tool of social and political control. And you can see this so clearly when you compare the U.S. to other countries.
The comparative data is really shocking here.
It's stunning. Look at the period from, say, 1960 to 1990. The U.S., Finland, and Germany all had pretty similar crime rates, but over that time, the U.S. incarceration rate quadrupled.
And in the other countries.
Finland's rate went down by 60%. Germany stayed stable. Today, our rate is 6 to 10 times higher than other industrialized nations. That huge gap isn't because we have more crime. It's because we have this system, and that system was built by the war on drugs.
Which leads to maybe the most damning data point of all.
Yeah.
The gap between who gets locked up for drugs and who actually uses drugs.
Yeah, this just blows the whole "it's about crime" argument out of the water. The data is incredibly clear. People of all colors use and sell illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates.
If anything, some studies show white youth use them even more.
Marginally more, in some cases, yes. But the enforcement is, it's so racially skewed, it's hard to believe.
Give us the numbers on that.
In some states, black men are sent to prison on drug charges at rates 20 to 50 times greater than white men. 50 times.
For the same behavior.
For the same behavior. Nationwide, even though the majority of drug users and dealers in America are white, 3/4 of all the people we put in prison for drug offenses are Black or Latino. You cannot explain that with crime rates. It can only be explained by policing choices.
Let's talk about the sheer scale of the explosion.
It's astronomical. Drug convictions alone account for about 2/3 of the increase in the federal prison population and more than half of the increase in state prisons between 85 and 2000.
And the raw numbers.
In 1980, before the war really ramped up, there were about 41,000 people in prison or jail for drug offenses. Today, it's around 500,000.
That's over a 1,000% increase.
An 1,100% increase.
Yeah.
And it had almost nothing to do with violent crime.
And what about the story we were told? That this was about going after the big-time kingpins.
Another myth. The data shows the exact opposite. The war focused overwhelmingly on the lowest level, most easily replaceable people. In 2005, 4 out of every 5 drug arrests were for simple possession, not sales. Possession.
Just having it on you.
Exactly. The goal was clearly volume, mass arrests, not strategic takedowns of major players.
And the drug that really drove this arrest boom.
Marijuana. Which is just wild when you think about it. Arrests for marijuana possession, a drug that's less harmful than alcohol or tobacco, accounted for nearly 80% of the growth in drug arrests during the 1990s.
It's incredible. The whole thing was an engine for punitiveness.
Unprecedented punitiveness, as the book calls it. It quadrupled the chance that if you got arrested for drugs, you were going to prison. And that sets the stage for the next part, the legal architecture that made it all possible.
Right. How do you actually build a system that produces these kinds of racial outcomes when your laws are all officially colorblind?
Okay, so the book explains this as a really sophisticated 2-stage process.
2 stages. What's stage 1?
Stage 1 is you grant law enforcement, so police on the street and prosecutors in the courtroom, an enormous, almost unlimited amount of discretion.
So they get to decide who to stop, who to search, who to arrest, who to charge.
Exactly. And when you give people that much unchecked discretion, you open the door wide for all of our implicit and explicit racial biases and stereotypes to rush in and guide those decisions.
Okay, so that's stage 1. Grant discretion. What's stage 2?
Stage 2 is the legal firewall. The Supreme Court effectively closes the courthouse doors to anyone who wants to challenge that racial bias. By creating an impossibly high standard of proof. They ruled that you can't just show a pattern of discrimination. You have to prove that a specific cop or a specific prosecutor acted with conscious, intentional, racist intent.
You have to prove they're a bigot.
You have to prove they're a bigot. And in a world where nobody admits to that, that's proof you can almost never find.
Okay, let's break that down because it's so important.
Yeah.
Let's start with stage 1, the discretion and the Fourth Amendment, which is supposed to protect us from unreasonable searches.
Right. And the argument here is that the Supreme Court basically carved out a drug exception to the Bill of Rights. They created these tools that give police almost unlimited authority to stop and search whoever they want.
And the first tool is the so-called consent search.
Yes. This is where police just walk up to you on the street or on a bus and ask, "Do you mind if I search your bags, your pockets?"
And legally, if you say yes, then it's a constitutional search.
Yep.
But who feels like they can actually say no to an armed police officer?
Almost no one. You feel like you have to comply. And that compliance is then legally defined as voluntary consent. So it subjects millions of innocent people, mostly in poor communities of color, to these incredibly invasive searches based on absolutely nothing.
And then for cars, you have the pretext stop. This came from a huge Supreme Court case when the United States. This one it's devastating.
It really is. The idea used to be that police couldn't use a minor traffic violation, like not signaling, as a pretext, as an excuse to pull you over to investigate something else they're suspicious about, like drugs, especially if that suspicion is based on your race.
But the Wen decision changed all of that.
It blew it up. The court ruled that an officer's real motivation, even if it's blatant racial profiling, is legally irrelevant. As long as they can point to any tiny traffic violation, the stop is good.
So an officer can see a car he thinks looks suspicious for whatever reason, follow it for 5 miles until the driver inevitably drifts over the center line for a second, and then use that to justify a full-blown drug investigation.
That is exactly how it works. It gives police a blank check to single out anyone they want. It completely guts the idea that you need evidence before you can be stopped and investigated by the police.
And even if you're pulled over and you refuse to let them search your car, they still have another tool, thanks to another case, Atwater v. City of Lago Vista.
That case took it even further. It said police can arrest you, handcuff you, take you to jail for even the most minor traffic offenses, things where the only penalty is supposed to be a small fine.
Like not wearing a seatbelt.
Right. So now imagine the power that gives an officer. They pull you over for a broken taillight. Let me search your car. You say no. Okay, fine. Get out of the car. You're under arrest. I'm taking you to jail overnight.
The coercion is immense. Most people are going to say, okay, fine, search the car.
Of course. It's an astonishing amount of arbitrary power, and it leads directly to these super aggressive policing tactics, which are then focused almost exclusively on certain neighborhoods.
The so-called war zones.
Exactly. Police go into these poor communities of color, and they just stop staggering numbers of people. It's a shotgun approach. They call it kissing frogs to find a prince. But in the process, they sweep up and traumatize thousands of innocent people.
And the tactics themselves are often militarized. We're talking SWAT raids.
Yeah, and the story of Alberta Sproul is just a heartbreaking example. She was a 57-year-old city worker in Harlem. A police informant gave a false tip, said her apartment had drugs and guns.
A false tip.
Completely fabricated, as it turned out. But based on that, a SWAT team threw a flashbang grenade into her apartment and stormed in. She had a heart condition. She died of heart attack on the spot.
And was anyone held accountable?
Her death was ruled a homicide, but no one was ever indicted. And this kind of military-style raid, often based on the word of a single unreliable informant, is a routine feature of the war on drugs.
And what's fueling this whole enforcement machine is a powerful profit motive. Asset forfeiture.
Yes. This is huge. A change in the law in 1984 allowed police departments to keep the proceeds from assets they seized in drug investigations. Cash, cars, even houses.
So their budgets could go up directly based on how much stuff they seized.
It created a massive financial incentive to prioritize drug enforcement over other types of crime. And the legal standard for seizing property is incredibly low.
They don't even have to charge you with a crime.
Right. They can seize your car or your cash based on mere suspicion. And then the burden of proof flips. It's on you, the owner, to go to court and prove your property is innocent.
Which is impossible for most poor people who can't afford a lawyer.
So up to 90% of these cases just go unchallenged. People lose their life savings, their cars, their homes, without ever being convicted of anything. It's a system ripe for abuse.
So you're arrested. Now you're in the court system.
Yeah.
And this is where the punitiveness really kicks in with plea bargaining and mandatory sentences.
This is where the machine really grinds people up. Most defendants get a public defender who they meet for 5 minutes before they go in front of a judge. And then they're hit with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986.
This is what created the mandatory minimum sentences.
Draconian sentences. 5, 10 years in federal prison for a first-time nonviolent drug offense. Sentences that are longer than what many countries give out for murder.
And what this does is it takes all the power away from the judge and gives it to the prosecutor.
All of it. Because now the prosecutor can come to you and say, look, the mandatory minimum for this charge is 10 years. If you go to trial and lose, that's what you're getting. Or you can plead guilty right now to this lesser charge, and I'll recommend 3 years.
It's an offer you can't refuse, even if you're innocent.
Many innocent people take those pleas. Prosecutors have even admitted that they routinely charge people with crimes they know they probably couldn't prove at trial, just to have that leverage to force a plea. The risk of fighting is just too great.
And the Supreme Court has backed this up, upholding sentences of 25 to life for stealing a few videotapes under California's 3 strikes law.
It's a system that's structurally designed to eliminate your right to a trial by jury. It's a machine built to process bodies into prisons as efficiently as possible.
Which brings us to stage 2, the legal firewall. How the Supreme Court made sure this entire architecture couldn't be challenged in court.
This is maybe the most important part to understand why the system has lasted so long. It's not just that the courts allowed all this discretion. They actively shielded the system from claims of bias.
It starts with the big one, McCleskey v. Kemp in 1987. This was about the death penalty.
Right. The defense presented this incredibly sophisticated statistical study showing massive racial bias in who gets the death penalty in Georgia. The evidence was undeniable.
So what did the court say?
They said it doesn't matter. They ruled that statistical proof of systemic bias is not enough. To win your case, you have to show proof of conscious, intentional discrimination in your specific case.
The smoking gun again. You have to prove the prosecutor or the jury was actively racist.
And the reason they gave is the most telling part. The court basically said that if they accepted these kinds of claims, it would throw into serious question the principles that underlie our entire criminal justice system.
So they admitted that bias is so baked into the system that to address it would be to paralyze the system itself.
They chose to protect the system over the principle of equal justice. It was a monumental decision.
And after that, they moved to protect the prosecutor.
That was a case called United States v. Armstrong in '96. It dealt with selective prosecution, the claim that prosecutors were only charging black defendants for crack cocaine offenses while ignoring whites.
Another thing that was statistically obvious.
Absolutely. But the court created this insane hurdle. They said that in order to even get discovery, to get the prosecutor's records to try and prove your case, you first had to provide evidence of similarly situated white people that the prosecutor chose not to charge.
That's the catch-22.
It's the ultimate catch-22. The information you need to prove your case is in the prosecutor's files, but you can't see the files until you've already proven your case. It made challenging prosecutorial discretion virtually impossible.
And they even weakened protections in jury selection.
Yeah, in a case called Perkett v. Elm, while it's technically illegal to strike jurors just because of their race, this decision made it incredibly easy for prosecutors to get around that. It said they could offer up any silly or superstitious reason for striking a black juror as long as it was technically race neutral.
Like what?
Like, I didn't like his long hair, or he had a beard, or he looked kind of mean. Basically, any ridiculous excuse was suddenly good enough, which sent a clear signal to lower courts to just look the other way.
And the final nail in the coffin was a 2001 case, Alexander v. Sandoval.
That case eliminated the last major tool for fighting systemic bias. It ruled that private citizens can no longer sue under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to challenge policies that have a racially disparate impact.
So you could no longer sue a police department for racial profiling based on their traffic stop data.
Not unless you could prove intentional discrimination, which we've already established is impossible. After Sandoval, the only way to challenge systemic bias was if the federal government itself decided to sue, which rarely happens. The system had achieved near-perfect legal immunity.
Okay, we've talked about how the system sweeps people in, but the caste system really forms in the next stage. It's not just about prison time, it's about the felony label.
That's the key. The stigma is the real punishment. The book argues that your second-class citizenship starts the moment you are branded a felon, even if you never spend a single day in prison.
And this exclusion happens through what are called collateral consequences, the invisible punishment.
Invisible is the right word, because these are legal sanctions, but the courts say they're not technically punishment, which means a judge doesn't even have to tell you about them when you're pleading guilty. You think you're signing up for 2 years of probation, but you're actually signing up for a lifetime of exclusion.
Let's run through them. It starts with your civic rights.
Yes, felony disenfranchisement. Millions of people lose their right to vote, in some states for life. It's a perfect echo of the poll taxes and literacy tests. You're also permanently barred from serving on a jury, so you're locked out of the two most basic functions of a citizen in a democracy.
Then there's just basic survival. Housing.
Housing becomes a nightmare. Any felony conviction can make you ineligible for public housing for at least 5 years. And in the private market, discrimination against people with records is perfectly legal and it's rampant. This was made much worse by President Clinton's one strike and you're out policy.
And the Supreme Court upheld the most extreme version of that policy, didn't they? In Rucker v. Davis.
They did. That decision is it's breathtakingly cruel. The court ruled that you can be evicted from public housing because of the criminal activity of a guest or a family member, even if you had no idea it was happening.
So a grandmother could lose her home because her grandson, who doesn't even live with her, gets caught with drugs a block away.
That's the law. It makes housing incredibly unstable for millions of poor families, constantly holding the threat of homelessness over their heads.
And of course, there's employment. The box.
Checking the box on a job application. It's a lifetime sentence to unemployment or underemployment. The research on this is so clear, and it's so racialized. A white applicant with a criminal record has a better chance of getting a callback than a black applicant with a clean record. Whiteness mitigates the crime. Blackness defines the criminal.
And just to make sure there are no paths to upward mobility, you're also cut off from public benefits.
You lose eligibility for food stamps, welfare, federally funded health benefits, and this is a killer federal student loans. So think about that. You can't get a job, you can't get housing, and you can't go back to school to try and get new skills. The exits are all sealed.
And on top of all that, you're hit with a mountain of debt.
This is the modern-day peonage system. When you're released, you're handed a bill for court costs, fines, fees for your own probation supervision, fees for drug testing. It creates this inescapable cycle.
And the story of Oralee Hurley just illustrates this perfectly.
It's a chilling story. She was in a diversion center, basically a form of custody, because she owed a $700 fine. She was working a full-time, minimum wage job, but most of her paycheck went right back to the center to pay for her own room and board. She was literally trapped. She couldn't earn enough to pay off the debt that was keeping her there.
The entire structure seems designed to make you fail, to make you end up back in prison. This is the churning.
That's the perverse logic of the whole system. You know, the massive increase in prison admissions over the last couple of decades isn't mostly from people committing new, serious crimes.
It's from parole and probation violations.
Technical violations, exactly. 2/3 of people sent back to prison are sent back for things like missing a meeting with their parole officer, failing a drug test, or not being able to pay their fees.
So you're being punished for failing to cope with your own exile.
That's a perfect way to put it. We exile you, we strip you of all your resources, and then we watch you like a hawk. And the moment you stumble, the moment you can't navigate this impossible obstacle course we've created, we treat that failure like a new crime and send you right back. It's a revolving door.
And what does this do psychologically? The book makes a really interesting comparison between the stigma of Jim Crow and the stigma of being a felon.
It's a crucial distinction. Under Jim Crow, the stigma was external. Everyone knew it was based on race, and that created solidarity. It fueled resistance.
But the stigma of criminality is different.
It's much more insidious. It's turned the Black community against itself in many ways. There's this sense of shame, of silence, the feeling that the people who are locked up must have done something wrong, that they made bad choices. It unravels families and communities.
The men themselves report feeling like a pariah caste, the new untouchables.
Yes. And that sense of scorn, of being permanently excluded, it can actually fuel the very behavior the system claims to be fighting. For some young men, embracing that gangsta identity becomes a twisted form of resistance, a way of coping.
It's like if society is going to label me a monster, I'll become the monster.
Exactly. It's a psychological defense mechanism, a bit like the Black is Beautiful movement reclaiming a stigmatized identity. But of course, it's ultimately self-defeating because it just reinforces the stereotypes that justify the whole system in the first place.
Okay, let's shift to how this system was built politically. The book traces it back to the Southern strategy and the deliberate political manipulation of racial fear.
This really started in the 1960s as a direct backlash to the civil rights movement. Conservatives began to systematically link their opposition to civil rights with law and order rhetoric.
So civil disobedience by activists was framed as just crime.
Exactly. Not as a political protest, but as anarchy that needed to be crushed. And politicians like George Wallace and then Richard Nixon and Barry Goldwater, they saw a huge political opportunity here.
To appeal to a certain kind of voter.
To appeal to poor and working-class whites who felt threatened by Black progress. They were the ones competing for jobs, dealing with school busing. They felt like they were losing status, and this law and order message was a way to mobilize their resentment.
It was a coded message.
It was a coded message that essentially said, we'll put those people back in their place. And it worked. It allowed wealthy, corporate-friendly politicians to get poor and working-class people to vote for them against their own economic interests.
And by the early 70s, this realignment was complete.
By 1972, a voter's views on race and crime were a better predictor of their party affiliation than their economic class. It completely shattered the old Democratic New Deal coalition.
And then along comes Ronald Reagan, who, the book argues, perfected this coded language.
He was a master of it. He mastered what the book calls the excision of the language of race. He never had to say the word. He talked about welfare queens and their Cadillacs, or he talked about criminal predators.
But everyone knew who he was talking about.
Everyone knew. And it resonated powerfully with those working-class white voters who felt like the Democratic Party had abandoned them for the cause of civil rights.
And the media played a huge role in cementing the public image that justified the crackdown.
A critical role. The Reagan administration needed to sell the war on drugs, and they did it by creating a media panic around crack cocaine. Researchers have shown this shift in imagery so clearly. In the 70s, when powder cocaine was seen as a drug for rich white people, the media stories were all about treatment and sympathy.
But when crack appeared in poor Black neighborhoods,
the whole narrative flipped. Suddenly it was all about crime, danger, super predators, and the need for law and order. This media offensive created the public image of the black drug criminal that was needed to justify building a billion-dollar prison system.
There's a great quote about this.
Yeah, from Jerome Miller. He said, "There are certain code words that allow you never to have to say race, but everybody knows that's what you mean, and crime is one of those."
This all circles back to a key distinction you made earlier, that this modern system runs on racial indifference, not necessarily racial hostility.
It's such an important point. You don't have to find politicians who are secretly wearing white hoods. Overt bigotry is rare. What the system requires is racial indifference, a profound lack of caring about the suffering that these policies cause in communities of color.
It's the sincere ignorance that Martin Luther King Jr. warned about.
Exactly. This sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity that allows good people to look at the system and say, well, it seems necessary or it makes sense. It's what allows the system to stay invisible, even with its massive scale.
Even in the black community, there's often a silence around it.
A deep silence, often rooted in that shame we talked about. And the ultimate tool for denial, the book argues, is black exceptionalism.
The fact that a black man can become president,
Or a CEO or Secretary of State. The success of a few exceptional individuals becomes the proof that the system is fair, that race is no longer a barrier, and it allows society to look at the millions who are locked up or locked out and say, well, it must have been their own fault. They just didn't make the right choices.
So given all this, the deep history, the legal immunity, the political engineering, the book's conclusion is that small reforms aren't enough.
Not even close. Litigation, piecemeal reforms. They can't dismantle a system this comprehensive. The argument is that what's needed is a new social movement, something on the scale of the civil rights movement to completely change the public consensus.
And the first goal of that new movement has to be to attack the idea of colorblindness itself.
Which is so counterintuitive, right?
Right.
For decades, the goal of the civil rights community has been to achieve a colorblind society. But the book says that's the problem.
How?
Because the colorblind consensus is what forces us to look at a young black man locked up for drugs and see him only as a raceless individual who broke the rules. It prevents us from seeing the segregated neighborhood he grew up in, the jobless economy, the biased policing that targeted him.
It prevents us from seeing the structure.
It prevents us from seeing the structure. The argument isn't that we shouldn't see race, it's that we should see each other fully in all our complexity, with all our history, and respond with care and accountability, not blindness.
Okay, now we get to what might be the most controversial argument in the book. The idea that affirmative action has, in a way, acted as a modern racial bribe.
This is a really provocative claim, and we have to be careful to explain the logic. The argument isn't that affirmative action is bad in a vacuum. It's about the role it has played in propping up this larger caste system.
By creating a cosmetic appearance of progress.
Exactly. You have black graduates from Yale and Harvard, black CEOs, a black president, and this visibility creates this greatly exaggerated sense that we've achieved racial equality in America.
And that myth of progress is what immunizes the prison system from criticism.
That's the argument. It allows people to say, how can you talk about a caste system when Barack Obama is president? The success of the few, the black exceptionalism we talked about, is used to justify the subjugation of the many. It becomes the proof that anyone can make it if they just try hard enough.
And it frames the plight of those in the system as an individual moral failure, not a structural one.
That is the function of the modern bribe. It gives symbolic status to a few, which distracts from the permanent exclusion of millions and keeps the colorblind consensus intact.
So the path forward, then, has to be about building a true multiracial coalition that confronts these divisions head-on.
It has to be. And the book argues there's an opportunity here, because the war on drugs, while it was designed with black people in mind, has ended up harming huge numbers of poor and working-class whites as collateral damage.
In rural areas, the opioid crisis, meth.
Exactly. High incarceration rates, families torn apart, jobs lost. This shared experience of being targeted by a punitive system creates the potential for a new bottom-up movement.
One that can overcome the historical divide and conquer strategy.
That has to be the goal. To build a coalition based on an ethic of genuine care for everyone caught in this net, including the poor whites who have been manipulated by racial rhetoric for centuries.
And the final call to action is a challenge, really, to civil rights advocates.
It's a powerful challenge, it says. Lay down the racial bribes. Stop accepting cosmetic diversity and symbolic victories. Join hands with people of all colors who are suffering and say to the people in power, accept all of us or none.
It's a profound conclusion to a really challenging deep dive.
Nah.
We've traced the architecture of this system, from its historical roots to the legal machinery of discretion and immunity, and the lifelong consequences of being branded a felon.
The whole thing really does reveal a sobering truth. The methods change to fit the times. From exploiting labor to warehousing a population deemed disposable. But the outcome, the systematic marginalization of a huge segment of the Black community, that stays remarkably consistent.
And the book really leaves you with this image of a fork in the road, a choice the nation made back in the 70s and 80s when deindustrialization was devastating inner-city communities.
A massive crisis that demanded a response. And one path could have been a new war on poverty, a huge investment in jobs, in education, in communities.
But that's not the path we chose.
No. The nation chose to declare a war on drugs, a war on those very people, a response based on punishment, control, and incarceration.
And that choice between investing in people and warehousing people,
Yeah.
it says something profound about our national priorities.
It really does. What does it reveal about who we as a nation consider valuable and who we consider disposable?
As the book says, in the end, a nation is a choice.
We really encourage you to think about that choice and what it means for justice in America today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.